Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was an immortal avatar. Immortality is a funny thing, some might think it a gift from the gods themselves. Wouldn't it be wonderful to live forever? To never age? Never die? Would not one call that a blessing? More like a curse. I've died so many times now I've lost count, and yet I keep coming back, with everything intact. Yes, my life is cursed, and yet, I enjoy it. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 5, Breakout. I never really figured out just why I enjoyed breaking and out of jail so much. Maybe it had something to do with my initial disrespect for authority. Perhaps my dislike of the Fire Nation? It might even have something all that time I spent trapped in that blood prison way back when. Who knows? Regardless, I was never really much of a fan of being locked up, or seeing others be unjustly imprisoned. In any case, I all but jumped at the chance to do something for these people. They needed a hero. And we just so happened to be there. Plus, it was the perfect chance to unleash my ultimate prank. I'd been looking for a good excuse to cause some mischief anyway. That it just so happened to manifest in this time of need was nothing short of a blessing. We made our plans that night, the six of us ate if you count Appa and Momo, and I could see there was some skepticism at first. Why wouldn't there be? This plan essentially hinged on myself, Aang, and Haru. Were it to fall, we'd be down 2 avatars and an earthbender. Not exactly the most pleasing outcome. But I was confident in my plan, and in my friends. What could possibly go wrong? So, here's the plan to invade the prison and kick some Fire Nation ass. Naruto began sometime later. I'm only going to explain this once, so listen, and listen well. He'd gathered them all together in a nearby barn, the 8 of them, himself, Katara, Suki, Sokka, Aang, Appa, Momo, and last, but certainly not least, Haru. Night was falling on the village. Tomorrow they would enact this gloriously devious strategy to free Haru's father and all the benders from Fire Nation control. Now, first, we scare the hell out of the little bitches. Naruto. The blonde sighed as Katara whacked him on the shoulder, the only part of him she could reach. Sorry, forgot about the swearing. Oh, leave him be, Katara. Suki paused from stroking Appa's chin to shake her head. He's obviously set on this. And it's not like we can leave those people trapped. Naruto opened his mouth to agree. That was when he saw the moonlight striking her face. She turned away from him, returning her attention to Appa, and for this, he was suddenly intensely grateful. It means she didn't catch him staring. She really did look different without her Kyoshi warrior makeup. Like a normal girl, even. Although she'd yet to change out of her armor, he could still see that she was a true beauty and would only grow with age. Unbidden, the memory of her kiss came roaring back, filling his face with fire. Down, boy. Is there something on my face? The young warrior became aware of his attention and touched a hand to her cheek. Naruto nearly swooned before getting himself back under control. Just barely. He'd gone without the fairer sex for so long he'd almost forgotten what it was like. And was it just him, or did he feel a touch of killer intent from Katara? No, he shook his head rapidly, dismissing Suki's words. It's nothing. Oh. She seemed slightly crestfallen at that. I see. I agree. Aang nodded, utterly oblivious to the scene or the tension. Sounds fun, right? Haru blinked. Fun. Don't listen to him. Sokka cried. This is not fun. This is the opposite of fun. Why aren't you listening, Aang? But I think it's fun. Darn it, Naruto, you've doomed us all. In that instant, the shinobi shook off his sorrow and grinned. That smile could have put a certain spirit to shame. No, I've doomed the enemy. Suki gulped. Naruto. You're seriously starting to scare me right now. The blonde's grin only grew. Good. He chuckled. Then it'll terrify the Fire Nation. Now here's the plan. He told them as much, his glorious idea to rescue the prisoners and prank the hell out their Fire Nation's wardens. There was a silence then, more than a few jaws hung agape at what the blonde had just told them. If he hadn't been the avatar of the gods, such a thing wouldn't have been feasible. Even now, his strange suggestion strained the limits of their credulity. Suki and Haru remained particularly baffled. Granted, they had not known the shinobi all that long, but this was ridiculous. You, sir, are a mad genius. Katara shook her head in disbelief, further inflaming their confusion. Disguising ourselves as Fire Nation? I'm surprised Sokka didn't think of that. Hey, I can't come up with all the plans. The warrior replied, begrudgingly recognizing the simple brilliance of Naruto's scheme. Guess I'm not the only tactician here. Aren't I? Naruto grinned, slapping his foster brother on the back. Honestly though, I think that title of mad genius should be reserved for Bumi. Aang burst into hysterics at that one. But how are you going to get on board without alerting them? I already told you, I'm not. Naruto's grin grew. Azula is. His gaze slid to Haru. She'll be escorting in a treasonous earthbender. Now it was Haru's turn to object. I haven't known you all that long, but this doesn't make any sense. How are we going to get the princess of the Fire Nation by the earth? Before he could finish, the blonde snorted and slapped both hands together, summoning up a massive plume of smoke, hence the exclamation. A series of hacking coughs arose from the barn, and when the plume dissipated, Team Avatar found themselves treated to an inexplicable sight. Naruto was gone. Princess Azula stood in his place. Hello, cretins. She sneered. Miss me? What in the dash? Their reaction time was nothing short of spectacular. Azula instantly found herself ensorcelled within a wall of earth and ice, with Sokka's boomerang and Suki's fan at her throat. Aang was the only one who held back, although whether it was out of hesitation or his own reluctance to kill remained to be seen. What have you done with Naruto? Katara demanded to know. Where is he? What did you do to him? Where did you take him? Oh, places. The princess's smile never faltered in the face of the waterbender's fury, those eerie golden orbs drifting slightly shut. Things. You know. That sort of thing. Answer me. Why, he's right here, of course. When next they opened those eyes were a startling shade of blue, Naruto's voice issuing forth from Azula's mouth a moment later. It's only me. Sorry about that, I couldn't resist pulling your legs. I just look like her, don't I? A simple shrug of those slender shoulders swiftly shattered the prison Katara and Haru had encased him in, shooting shards of dirt and broken earth erupting outwards with effortless ease. By the time the dust had cleared, Naruto was with them once more. Wow. Aang blinked. Wish I could do that. Katara wasn't so easy to convince. Wait a second. How do we know you're the real Naruto? A long-suffering sigh left his lips. All right then. Only I could know this. The waterbender stiffened. He wouldn't dare. Katara, when you were only 6 years old you once told me you wanted to marry someone. That someone was. Naruto's mouth was quickly covered by a deeply flushing Katara. You promised not to talk about that, Naruto. She hissed out. Turning her head slightly she found Nai but everyone staring back at her with confused expressions. Her flush grew even redder. Thankfully, Naruto chose that moment to break the silence. Oh, and Sokka, you wet the bed until you were 10. Do you believe me now? The hysteria that followed as well as the grateful giggle from Katara was utterly priceless. Haru actually snickered. You did what? Not cool, man. Sokka whined. Not cool. Naruto? Suki gawped, stepping forward. I'm afraid I don't understand. How did you turn into that girl? Yes. Haru agreed. Could you please explain, Sir Avatar? The blonde merely laughed and changed back into Azula again. Henge. The now transformed Naruto smiled softly as he observed a manicured hand. It was eerie, Suki thought. By the gods themselves, he even sounded like that crazy girl. It's a fascinating ability, to tell the truth, useful, too. I've had centuries to master its greatest intricacies. I can stay like this for at least a week if I don't use any of my major techniques. Used to be I could only transform into someone I knew, but now? Now I can become almost anyone. Of course, I did think about becoming the royal flaming asshole himself, Fire Lord Ozai anyone? But where's the fun in that I say? Suki frowned. You think this is fun? Of course, I do. Naruto grinned, popping back into his normal body. It's been ages since I've pranked the Fire Nation. What better way to do it than with their own princess? I got a good look at her mannerisms when we fought. With a bit of practice, I'm certain I can fool them. From there, it's just a matter of pranking the hell out of the warden and his men, not to mention inspiring the earthbenders to rise up and fight their oppressor as true warriors should. It'll be cake. It still doesn't change the fact that you're taking an awful risk. She pressed. You're one of our strongest fighters, remember? If we lose you, then we risk losing the war itself. She didn't see anger bristle in the corner of her eye. For a moment Naruto thought the boy was going to reveal his status. A curt glare from Katara caused him to swiftly shut his mouth. That. Suki, don't worry. He tried to brush off her concern gingerly as he could. I'll be careful. Like you were careful against Azula? Came the retort. Naruto, she burned you. Her words caused him to cringe. He was well aware of the still healing scar lining his neck. He'd gained it when deflecting Azula's bolt of lightning. It had actually managed to char him a little before he'd grabbed and redirected it. The injury didn't impede him, but it still served as a brutal reminder of what might happen should he ever hold himself back in the heat of battle like that again. That was the first and last time he'd underestimate a firebender. Or anyone, for that matter. That won't happen again. Agitated though he might be, Naruto refused to let it show. If you'd just hear me out. I'm sorry, I can't agree with this plan. It puts you in too much danger. Let me know when you've thought of something less dangerous. She walked away and out of the barn before anyone could think to stop her. The ensuing silence tasted like ash in Naruto's throat. Why was she so worried about him? Suki. She'll be back. Sokka yawned. What matters now is that we get some shut-eye. Obviously, we've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow. I'm going to bed. Naruto groaned as the others grabbed their bag and prepared to turn in, wisely refraining from saying anything. Everyone, save Katara. She alone approached him, realizing his distress whereas the others did their best to avoid it, not for lack of caring, but out of fear for angering the powerful shinobi. Are you all right? She asked, touching a hand to his shoulder. Naruto feigned a shrug. Was it something I said? She just worries about you. Yeah, I gathered that much. Honestly, He would have said more, had not his injury flared up. Tongues of invisible fire shot up and down his neck, a silent reminder of the near miss he'd suffered back on Kyoshi Island. Katara saw him cringe, and dipped a hand into the pouch she wore around her arm. Almost before he knew it he felt the cool touch of water upon his neck, stinging yes, but soothing the worst of the pain. It had not the healing properties of proper medicine not yet, but he sensed she'd soon lean about her powerful talents. Till then, he'd just bear with the wound and let it heal. She really hurt you, didn't she? Katara soothed, running her still wet hand across the fresh scar, numbing it even further. Naruto bit back another sigh. Nothing I haven't endured before. Naruto, I think Suki might be right. She indicated a bale of hay and forced him to sit so she could tend the wound further. Your plan's rather reckless. Not you too. Naruto groaned childishly as she complied with her demand. Why is everyone so concerned about me? Have you all forgotten just how strong I am? It's not just me, Katara replied, running her hands over his neck. Everyone worries about you. The way you throw yourself into battle, it's almost like you're suicidal. The former shinobi ruthlessly bit back the urge to snap at her for the unperceived slight. Death was the last thing he wanted, but he aren't tell her that. There you go. All done. Sking softly to himself, the last shinobi sat up, his treatment finished. Fine. He relented. Because you asked so nicely, I'll try to be more careful. Her smile was nothing short of dazzling. Oh, and by the way, she leaned closer, if you ever mention that bit about me wanting to marry you when I was little. Yes? This time, the smile was so cold it actually made him shiver. I'll bury you in a glacier. With that, she strode away. Naruto watched her go, shaking his head. Why did he always attract deadly women? Why? Why couldn't his life just be simple? Later that night, his life became even more complicated. Naruto had chosen to take the first watch, on the off chance that the guard from before wanted to exact his vengeance on Haru's shop. They'd be in for a nasty surprise, that they would. Still, it was a lonely duty, trying to stay awake, out here in the cold, all by himself. For a brief moment he imagined he was on his own again, with no friends, or family to call his own. It made him shudder. Those thought of being alone were no longer a passing fear, now it was a nightmare of sorts. He'd spent so much time in a group that the thought of leaving them behind actually hurt. That'll happen someday, he reminded himself, make no mistake. If this war didn't kill Katara and his newfound friends, then old age certainly would. The vile old one enemy even he couldn't defeat. Time. Everything had been so much easier when he'd only need worry about himself. Now, it seemed everywhere they went, their little group grew a little larger. First with Suki on Kyoshi. Now in this desolate little village, Haru. Aang just might have found a way to start learning earthbending in him, even if the young bender decided to remain behind once they went on their way, which remained quite likely. Who knew what would come to pass next? Once, that would have sorrowed him. Now he refused to look to the future. He'd long since resolved to live in the moment since joining the Southern Water Tribe, trying to gaze ahead into his future would only bring upon him untold sorrow. His strange little family was only growing. That should make him happy. Right, he pinched his whiskered cheeks, happy. His thoughts were broken by the crack of a broken branch somewhere behind him, alert. He rounded with a hiss and stepped toward the darkness Rinnegan flaring. Who goes there? Relax. A familiar voice soothed. It's me. Suki? Naruto relaxed a touch, baffled to find none other than Suki emerging from the black at his flank. Don't do that. I could have killed you. She looked fearsome in her armor, but somehow the lack of makeup made her appear almost fragile, he thought. Sorry, the Kyoshi warrior smiled softly, at least she had the good grace to look sheepish. I couldn't sleep. You too, huh? The brunette nodded in affirmation, coming to stand beside him. I thought I'd come to relieve you. Naruto shook his head. Not tired. The words lapsed into awkward silence. Neither dared glance at one another, painfully aware of the argument they'd had mere hours before. At last, Naruto couldn't take it anymore. He'd been so caught up in his plan for prankdom that he'd failed to notice the lone voice of dissent in the group. Was it right for him to just dismiss her out of turn like that? Of course not. He needed to pause and consider the other's thoughts, not throw himself headlong into battle and cause chaos without a care. He opened his mouth to speak, and so did she. I'm sorry. They apologized in the same instant. There was a brief moment of hesitation, then the two teens laughed, the tension bursting forth from them in a single guffaw. Just like that it was over, the rift between them was closed. It was wrong of me to call you foolish, Suki admitted. And it was wrong of me to be so reckless, Naruto replied. So, I guess we're good, then? Guess so. Darn, she swore, her pale face flushing beneath the moonlight. I feel like a complete idiot. At his questing look, she continued. Here I had this grand speech prepared, and then you forgive me, just like that. What am I supposed to do now? You could always stay and watch the stars with me, Naruto drawled, gazing upward at the thousands of tiny pinpricks above, the raiment of heaven hanging over their heads. I was keeping watch for that firebender from before, but I think he's given up for the day. He sat and patted the spot beside him, quietly wondering whether or not she would accept the unspoken invitation. I'd like that. Naruto felt his heart skip a beat as the young warrior accepted his offer, sitting down and scooting dangerously close to him. When her hand came to rest atop his, he nearly jumped out of his skin. But Suki was flushing just as much as he, so he bore with it. That's the star of Kyoshi. She indicated a particularly bright pinprick of light with her finger. You can see it from almost anywhere in the world. Naruto whistled. I had no idea you were well-versed in astrology. It's nice, isn't it? She murmured, laying her head on his shoulder, still peering up at the stars. I could just stare at them all night. Naruto made no move to pull away. If Suki was interested in him, then so be it. He was beginning to understand now, see the futility of it all. Nothing he said to her would change her mind short of outright violence, and right now he just didn't have the heart to push her away. A sudden pang of guilt stabbed this heart as they stood there beneath the stars. This girl trusted him, looked out for him, wanted the best for his sake, and here he was all but lying to a fellow member of Team Avatar, someone whom he just might be developing feelings for. Suki, there's something I need to tell you. Yes. I'm not the Avatar. He blurted out. There was another silence, this one charged with awkward tension. Suki pulled away from Naruto, her auburn eyes boring deep into his own. When she finally spoke, her voice was the barest of whispers. I know. You knew? Naruto's jaw nearly hit the ground. What? When? For a few weeks now. She admitted, suddenly sheepish. I realized around the time when we left Kyoshi, it was always Aang who kept focusing on saving the world. Not you. When I saw the marking and his bending, it kinda became obvious. When I asked Sokka and Katara, they fessed up that it was their idea. At the blonde's pensive expression, she offered up a slight smile. I'm not angry, you know. I understand why you lied to me back then. You might not be the Avatar everyone was looking for, but you were just doing what you felt right, I suppose. Well, that's just it. A wry smile pulled at his lips, it felt good to open up, especially to her. I suppose you could say I am an Avatar, but not like Aang. My abilities don't focus primarily on the elements, but other areas of that aspect. They make me almost invincible, but I can still be injured. Here he touched hand to his scar. Still be killed. That was why I spoke out earlier. When those words came, they nearly floored him, but it was nothing compared to what came next. We still need you. I need you. She said the last part in a very tiny voice. Were an ordinary man present, he wouldn't have heard it. But Naruto was no ordinary man. He heard every word. Why? The warrior blinked slowly. Why what? Why would you need someone like me? Because you're you. Suki replied. even with all your imperfection. You might be stubborn, headstrong, reckless. Naruto coughed. Ahem, sitting right here. Oh, sorry. Suki flushed. Anyway. You inspired me. She continued, her voice gaining force with each word. Until the day we met, I thought Kyoshi was all that mattered. There was nothing else. No one else. I didn't care about the Fire Nation, or about the war. Heck, I'd been convinced the Avatar didn't exist until you and Aang showed up. But you proved me wrong. I decided to leave Kyoshi because of you. It doesn't matter whether you're the Avatar or not. You still showed me I have much to learn, reminded me that there's an entire world out there for me to see. A world that will be destroyed by the Fire Nation if something isn't done. Her words were so impassioned by the time she finished, Naruto was literally left in awe. I'm glad I could inspire you. So, back on Kyoshi. What you saw were shinobi skills, Suki. I gained them a lifetime ago. Darn. She pouted. And here I was hoping you could teach me. A slight smile played on her pale features. It might not be real bending, but I'd love to learn. Naruto actually blinked at that. He'd never once considered taking on a student in this land. He was the last of a great people, and would likely still reincarnate time and time again. But to restart the shinobi people as a whole, why hadn't he thought of this sooner? Was this what he was meant to do? Recreate his people? He wasn't sure. I suppose I could try. Really? I don't see why not. Naruto shrugged. But I should warn you. I'm a strict teacher. His words died away as her lips touched his cheek for the second time since they'd met. Wah! I look forward to learning from you then, Sifu Naruto. She rose and performed a deep bow. And I'll see you later. Good night. What was it that drew strong, deadly girls to him? Katara hadn't struck him as dangerous until this evening. Her threat about burying him had been quite real. Suki was a warrior herself, now aspiring to be a shinobi in a world of benders and non-benders. Then there had been that Hellcat from the Fire Nation. Azula. That was one hell of a fighter, there. Idly, he wondered. What was Princess Hothead up to now? Meanwhile. You should be afraid of me. Azula jumped to a sitting position in her cot on the ship with a small scream, her eyes popping open wide, sweat on her forehead and her breath coming in small shallow gasps. A dream, she realized, willing her frantic heart to stop beating its way out of her chest. It had been just a dream. Nothing more and nothing less. The princess tried to tell to the adrenaline coursing through her veins, quietly willing her body to accept what her mind already knew to be true. It was all a dream. She told herself that repeatedly as she tried to settle back down on the cot. It was all a dream. She tried to stare at the still-lit candles of her cabin until she fell asleep, but they cast shadows and played havoc with her mind. She was literally jumping at the sight of them. Closing her eyes didn't help either. She was terrified he would come for her in the dark. Terrified, and yet, strangely excited. The longer she lay there, the more that excitement began to exert itself. The thrill of facing a strong opponent warring with the terror of being made a helpless little girl before him. Just a dream, she reminded herself. Just a dream, just a dream, just a dream. But if it was a dream, why did it hurt? Sleep-gummed eyes creaked open once more and surveyed her cabin, barely able to comprehend her dimming surroundings. Wait a minute. She bolted upright again, memories blazing through her mind like an inferno of otherworldly fire. The Avatar. He'd killed her. Hadn't he? She clearly recalled tasting blood in her mouth, feeling her spirit depart her body. And yet here she was, as though she'd woken up from a horrible dream. But it was no dream. It had been real. All too real. Why am I not dead? she thought, checking herself for injuries. Thankfully, she found some. Thankfully, because it meant she wasn't losing her mind. That twinge in her right side bespoke of a recently healed broken rib, and the dull pulse of her ankle warned that her left ankle was still very much sprained. Her cheek was horribly sore. There would be a bruise tomorrow morning if she was lucky, swelling if she wasn't. Apparently only the most life-threatening injuries had been tended to. Her wounds were still healing, but they looked as though they'd been tended to recently. Perhaps only a few days ago. She knew none of her men were capable in the healing arts, most of them barely knew how to try and bandage their own. That left the Avatar. Naruto. He must have done this. But why? Why kill her and bring her back? It was well known that the Avatar had power over the spirit world, but she hadn't thought that a being like that could bring the dead back. Bring her back. Try as she might, she just couldn't muster up the rage she needed to hate him. Terror at what he'd done to her, yes, and excitement at the prospect of fighting him again, but anger? No. It simply wouldn't come. What has he done to me? She touched a hand to her head, the room still swimming in the candlelight. Why, she whispered to herself, tucking her knees into her chest. Why did you do that, you fool? Her last words were little more than a soft, lonely whisper. Why did you heal me? The next morning, they took Haru's mother. Naruto bolted upright, lurching out of his sleeping bag as Sokka's cry filled the barn. Rather, he tried. Something warm and soft, though no necessarily heavy, pushed him back down. It took him less than an instant to recognize that familiar bob of brown hair in his peripherals. Suki. Somehow, she'd crawled into his sleeping bag overnight. How on earth? Never mind. He was a shinobi, for the love of those gods. Honestly, after that kiss last night, he should have expected something like this. Kakashi-sensei's words rang in his mind from ages past. Look underneath the underneath. Thankfully no one noticed in the chaos, everyone was too busy darting outside to investigate the burns outside. Haru in particular. Naruto was suddenly and intensely grateful that he'd hidden the boy further back in the barn, rather than risk him being discovered. But now was not the time for such things. In that time, it took for everyone to scramble out. Naruto managed to jostle Suki awake, and after a bit of flushing on both of their parts, they were able to squirm free without anyone being the wiser. We speak of this to no one. Suki nodded fervently. Agreed. They emerged to find the shop scorched beyond all recognition, the ground blackened and twisted, for at least a mile around. Talk about your scorched earth responses. Evidently, the firebenders hadn't taken too kindly to Naruto's little prank. Haru was visibly trembling with anger, tiny pebbles stirring at his feet whilst he struggled to control his anger, prevent himself from erupting into a terrifying display of earth-bending prowess. But the leash on his bending was thin, and the poor boy looked as though he might snap at any instant, if someone didn't say something. Haru. Naruto barked. Front and center. The boy went stiff as a rod. Why yes, Avatar Naruto? Naruto silently resolved to tell the boy the truth later. But for now, he needed to take command, or the poor kid was going to kill someone. We're getting your mother back. In fact, we'll be bringing all the earthbenders back, he declared. Right here. Right now. But the plan is about to be improvised. Naruto replied sternly, beckoning them closer. Come here. All of ya. I'll have to henge the lot of you for this to work. Wow. Aang glanced down at his illusory body in utter awe, barely able to believe what his fellow avatar had done to the six of them. They all looked like firebenders. Right down to the armor. Haru and Suki remained stoically silent, the latter deciding not to wonder just how Naruto had. Sokka and Katara appeared to be visibly chafing at their new albeit temporary appearance. Appa and Momo had been left behind in the barn. Changing their appearance wouldn't do anything but hinder the group, and no one would believe a firebender with a sky bison. It won't last. A slightly winded Naruto explained. I can only maintain those forms for an hour or so. Guess we'll have to make this quick. And to think, I was so looking forward to using the rotten eggs and glue I'd sealed away. Ah well. I can always make it better. Drawing himself up, he transformed into Azula, assuming the role with an eerie level of grace. Now remember, he began, you'll need follow my lead. No talking. No showboating. You're supposed to be my elite guard for this little venture. Nothing more. Do not speak unless spoken to. Once we get aboard, get out of sight and drop the transformations. The rest is up to you. With the plan in place, he led them to the nearest garrison, kicked down the door, and barged in. You there! Soldier! The Fire Nation lieutenant had just opened his mouth to reply, only for his jaw to slam into the ground once he laid eyes upon Azula striding toward him. Princess Azula? I take it you know who I am. Why yes, my lady. He swiftly fell to a knee in genuflection. Your father did not inform us of your arrival. We weren't expecting you. Had you sent word, I would have prepared a proper welcome. No need. Naruto silenced him with a wave. I am here of my own accord. Now, what is your name? Lieutenant Shu, my lady. The man barely stammered out. If I may ask, Tito, what do we owe the honor? Consider this a surprise inspection, Lieutenant Shu. The smile Naruto generated was entirely genuine, henge or not. I'm touring the colonies, making certain everything is up to par as per my father's standards. I understand you have an offshore prison responsible for manufacturing coal, do you not? At the man's nod, the pseudo-princess continued. As I thought. Take me to this so-called prison of yours, soldier. I wish to see it for myself. Personally. Will your guards be accompanying us as well, my lady? Yes, of course we will. Naruto waved off the man's concern with the royal way he'd heard by so many arrogant nobles in his land. Another touch of genjutsu was all it took to bend the man's mind to his will, to prevent him from questioning the strange behavior of these so-called guards. Of course, princess. I now know why I enjoy breaking in and out of prisons. It isn't the food. Nor the guards. And it certainly isn't the people. Not the slate gray walls or the lumpy beds either. It is something far more base than that, a vile little word that I have come to love. Pranking. Barring that, there is one other word. That word would best be described as riot. Naruto as Azula was laughing his head off as he flung fireballs at the hapless Fire Nation guards. Aang's trick had worked flawlessly, summoning up coal from the vents. A few impassioned words from Katara toward the earthbenders, and that was their cue for Azula to lose her pretty little head and join the resistance. Their transformations dropped away in hiding, Katara and the others were thus freed to leap into action and wreak all manner of havoc upon the warden and his men in spectacular fashion. In short, all bloody hell broke loose. I do so love it when a plan comes together. For the next hour, the entire Fire Nation prison experienced pure hell. But that was not Naruto's intention. No, this had been done for one reason and one reason only. Impersonating a Fire Nation princess was certainly a pricey little move, but making everyone think said princess was on the side of the enemy was utterly priceless. In short, Azula's feared reputation of being the Fire Nation's best was brought crumbling down around her unknowing ears in a matter of minutes. Now, when the Fire Nation spoke of their beloved princess, they would speak of only one thing. Azula had gone mad. Banished? Azula could barely believe her ears when she received word by messenger hawk 2 days later. Me? By father? What do you mean? What did I do? When the bird simply sat there, she turned it into all but a roast chicken and demanded her cook serve it up for dinner. No, she whispered fervently, suffering a mental and comical breakdown. I can't be banished. Not me. I'm not like Zuzu, I'm father's favorite. There's no way I could be banished. There's just no way. Somewhere miles away. Uzumaki Naruto was laughing his ass off. Chapter 6, Into the Fire. In hindsight, getting Azula banished wasn't exactly intentional at the time. I never even once considered the repercussions. It wasn't as though Ozai would actually banish her for losing to me to begin with, or so I had thought in my ignorance. No one could be that much of a royal flaming asshole, right? Right? Turns out I was wrong. Azula had already been well on her way to being banished after I'd shown her mercy back in Kyoshi. It seems the one thing the Fire Nation despises more than losing is mercy. The twisted little stunt we'd pulled by impersonating her and her guards in the first place just hastened the pace a little, I guess. But I digress. Turns out Haru decided to travel with us, after all. Something about wanting to prevent the Fire Nation from ever destroying a family like his again. Kid's got spunk, I'll give him that. His folks were all for it, said he had a destiny and it would be better served by traveling with us. So now, against all odds, we've got us an earthbender. Not much of a teacher though, so I still need to find someone to train Aang. Aang wanted to double back to Omashu for that very reason. Thankfully cooler heads prevailed and we were able to make him realize doing so now would only prove to be a waste of time. Didn't stop him from asking Haru to show him a few things, though. I state once again, the boy is no master. I've still got the bruise from that last boulder to prove it. Nevertheless, our little family is growing. I only hope Appa can keep carrying all of us without wearing himself out. If this keeps up, we're going to need another bison. Ha! Back then, I had time for humor. And why not, I say? We'd lost Zuko, and unless Azula allied with him, not bloody likely, we wouldn't have worry about brother or sister for some time. I had no way of knowing fate was coming around to bite me in the ass for all the chaos I was causing. That was when it happened. Sue. Naruto took one look at Sokka, saw his expression, and swerved his head to look back at the clouds. Why was it that everyone saw fit to interrupt his meditations? Realizing he wouldn't have any peace until Sokka had his say, the last shinobi reluctantly rounded on the young water tribe warrior to see what he had to say. Sokka was looking at him most strangely, his body tense, expression pensive. Naruto adopted a curious facade of his own, wondering what might have perturbed his friend so. Now we've got an earthbender. The boy ventured hesitantly. Naruto's gaze slipped to Haru, peaceably levitating a few pebbles in his right hand, turning them end over end, relentlessly. Rescuing his mother and father had worked wonders for the boy's self-confidence, but even here in the clouds, he preferred to keep to himself, speaking only when spoken to. Yes, it would seem so. Just wondering, but are we going to pick up a firebender, too? PFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFFF It would have sailed over the edge, but Katara simply waterbended back into his cup. The young avatar shot his friend a quick and grateful glance, followed by a series of sheepish chuckles from the others at his predicament. Suki herself managed to keep a grip on her teacup. Naruto refused to say where he'd procured all this gear from, but at the mention of firebending, even her normally sunny disposition darkened. Yeah, what are we going to do about that? As much as I hate to admit it, Sokka has a point. Hey! Suki's right. Katara agreed. We might be able to find Aang a teacher for water and earth, but her still has to learn Master Fire, doesn't he? There was a silence as Team Avatar molded over. I think Azula or Zuko would make a fine teacher. Naruto suggested. Ah. Or maybe Iroh? Aang nearly spat out his tea again. The blonde didn't take too kindly to that. Oi, he sighed as Katara once more water bent the liquid back into the cup. I went to all the trouble of making that way up here, you know, and it ain't easy. Show some appreciation, Aang. Sorry. After being pursued by a small army of firebenders after their wildly successful jailbreak, Team Avatar was currently traveling over water once more, taking a much-needed opportunity to recuperate from their successful attack and subsequent escape until they reached land once more. Even now they could see a patch of earthy green and brown growing steadily larger in the distance. But for now, there was only the open ocean under their feet, the salty smell of the sea and cries of seagulls flitting past. Now, even those birds seemed to fall silent as Naruto's words truly sank in. "You can't be serious." Finally, Haru found his voice. "Putting your friendship with the Dragon of the West aside, they're our enemies. Why would they want to help us?" At Naruto's glower, the poor bender nearly fell to pieces right then and there, faltering beneath his teacher's scrutiny. "Prince Zuko Dash," he began. "Currently exiled Prince Dash. I know." He had the good grace to at least appear chastised at Naruto's caustic remark. "But that's just it. He's a prince, former or not. And I doubt Azula would be willing to teach Aang anything after the stunt we just pulled back in my hometown. If anything, she probably wants to kill you even more if she still thinks you're the Avatar. In fact, I wouldn't put it past her to get at you through us. No offense, Sifu Naruto, but I think she just enjoys hurting people." There was a moment of quiet killer intent in which everyone could feel all of their inner fears coming true. Despite having only met the mad girl once, Naruto had made them well aware of her methods. If she could hurt him through them, if she could get to him by causing one of them pain, he'd do more than just defeat the princess. He'd obliterate the entire Fire Nation itself. Finally, when it seemed that they would be suffocated by his anger at any moment, the blonde spoke up to quell those fears. "Haru, Suki, Aang," he drawled, his visage turning stern. "Come here. All three of ya." As they looked on, he placed a thumb in his mouth and bit down. Hard. Blood gushed forth from the wound, dribbling down his arms to form a small scrawl of kanji upon his left bicep. "Your hand." "Leave it," came the reply. "I need it to mark you guys." Momo squeaked as Naruto pressed his still bleeding thumb to the lemur's forehead. When it came away there was a small, but unreadable kanji imprinted there. "What is that?" Suki wondered aloud. "It's called the Haration," Naruto answered, tracing the kanji into Haru's shoulder. "It allows me to teleport to a place or person I've marked in the past. Sokka and Katara already have it." He did not wilt in the slightest at their admonishing glances. "It was necessary. Before he left, your father asked a favor of me. He told me to protect you. The both of you. Placing the Haration on you just seemed natural at the time. How else was I to keep you safe? Besides, Sokka's mark is just between his shoulder blades. He'd never have known about it otherwise." Katara opened her mouth to protest, only to snap it shut as something occurred to her. Naruto noticed. "Something wrong, Katara?" "Where?" Her voice was little more than a tiny squeak. "Did you mark me?" "Where?" "I said, where did you mark me?" Naruto just stared at her and began laughing. "It's not funny," she told him. Yes, it is," he howled. "Only you would think I'd do something like that." After finally managing to calm down, he looked back at Katara, suddenly aware of the deft motions of her hands. "Wait a second, what are you doing with that water argh?" He barely had time to finish with that sentence before water spewed up and out of her pouch, sending him flying off Appa and to his death miles below. Or, so everyone thought. 7 seconds passed after he toppled over the edge. 7 seconds of agonizing silence. Still, no one made any effort to retrieve the fallen blonde. Suki began to fret. She knew Naruto's body was near immortal, but even so, a fall into the ocean from this height might well spell his doom. The last thing she wanted was for her precious teacher, the boy whom she'd begun to feel, for fall to his doom so early in their journey. Fearing what she would find, the Kyoshi warrior peered over the edge. All she saw was a few Naruto-sized impressions in the clouds below, a sure sign that it had been a fast and furious fall to the water below. What if he was hurt? What if? Aang was only a split second faster than her, springing to his feet, light as a breeze, ready to hurl himself out into oblivion after his friend. We have to go get him. Relax, Arrowhead, Sokka soothed. Sifu's fine. Suki was inclined to agree. But shouldn't we do something? Nah, the warrior went back to sharpening his boomerang, give him a few seconds. Are you sure? He's right. Katara seconded, leaning back in the saddle, her brief burst of anger gone, little more than a memory. If something like that could have killed Sifu, he wouldn't be here now. Why does everyone call him that? The young avatar asked. He's not your teacher, is he? Not anymore, no, but he did teach me a few things about bending when I was little. Katara replied. You'd be amazed what he could do with water. I learned a few moves from him back then, too. Sokka performed a perfunctory swing with his club for added emphasis. Naruto's a decent guy outside of battle, but when it comes to anything involving actual combat, or worse, training, he's a slave driver. Right, Katara? Both brother and sister shuddered at some unspeakable memory. I'm so glad he doesn't make me run laps around the South Pole anymore. Or make me waterbend for 2 days straight. Katara added with a small shiver of her own. Haru and Suki exchanged nervous glances. And then there was the one time. Sokka! Stop! Katara cried. We are not, under any circumstance, mentioning that to anyone, ever again. The rest of Team Avatar silently sweat dropped. Well, promise to teach me the shinobi arts. Suki smiled nervously. I don't think he's that excessive. Nicety but flattery won't work in May. Scarce had she spoken than Naruto reappeared, his words and body roaring past them and into the sky, his abrupt ascent showering everyone with droplets at his passing. He did not look nor sound pleased at all. Suki couldn't tell whether he was wet from Katara's water, or if it had anything to do with short dip in the ocean just now. Regardless, he was quite the sight, soaring through the clouds like some wayward angel, streaked in otherworldly luminance. Wait a minute. Was Naruto actually glowing? He was. Bathed in saffron light from head to toe, he was the picture of godhood. Those eerie red orbs held her, captivated her, drew her in. I want. Her cheeks burst into furious flames seconds later as she realized what she'd just thought. Ah! Down, girl! Down! The Kyoshi warrior ruthlessly shook her head, desperately seeking inner peace and clarity as her teacher alighted beside her, effortlessly gliding down from the heavens to steal a place at her side. That golden glow and those eerie markings still shone from his body. Up close he looked downright intimidating within the cloak. She could see she wasn't the only one thunderstruck by the blonde's newfound appearance. Katara mouth hung agape as well. Clearly the waterbender was just as baffled by this transformation. Honestly, he never ceased to amaze her. Watch those wandering eyes, girls. Naruto admonished, grinning. Wouldn't want to get the wrong idea. Suki was fairly certain her face was flaming, even behind. Well, Katara stuttered, recovering herself. I'm glad you're alright. Naruto's language could have melted the iron hull off a Fire Nation vessel. Thankfully, his cursing was spoken in his native tongue. Crazy girl. He finished with a hiss. I know I taught you to be ready at a moment's notice, but that was ridiculous. It's your own fault for teasing me, the brunette chided lightly. If you'd just told me where you'd put the seal instead of laughing, I wouldn't have overreacted. Naruto opened his mouth to reply, and promptly snapped it shut. True, she did have a point, but hey, it had been so long since he'd laughed like that. Katara didn't exactly need to know about it, did she? Yet. So instead of arguing, he forced himself to relent and grin beneath her glare. Won't happen again. Looks aside, there was just something about righteous female fury that made even him wary of her when she was like this. Apparently, Sokka did not fear the female fury. He nearly fell off the saddle himself in laughter. Never woulda thought he'd be afraid of Katara. Katara. What was that, Sokka? And nothing. Aang, get back over here. Naruto said, ignoring the bickering siblings and biting his thumb for a second time. I still need to mark ya. Reluctantly the young bender did as he was told, trying his utmost not to flinch in dismay when he saw that bloody digit. But why your blood? The boy asked squeamishly as the shinobi traced a symbol onto his left bicep. Is that really necessary? Naruto sighed, air-drying himself with a jutsu before falling back to Appa's back. It seems clouds are made out of water after all. But, first, let's answer your question. Yes, Aang, it is necessary. Ink might wash off. My blood won't, not if I don't want it to. It'll never wash off. By using my own blood as a catalyst, the seal itself is strengthened, allowing me be able to travel farther. For example, Katara could be in the Fire Nation, and I'd still be able to reach her where I say, back home in the South Pole, for example. Although it might take me a few minutes to travel that far. Sokka thumbed at his chin. That's pretty powerful stuff. Naruto noticed Suki looking at him hopefully. Sorry, he mollified her, I'm afraid I'm the only one who can use it. In any case, it's your turn. Pick a spot. Alright. She nervously pulled back the collar of her dress, allowing him to brand her just below her neck, although not without a small flush. One could easily see it, even within her makeup. Naruto wisely chose not to tease the poor girl any further than he already had, and certainly not in the presence of Katara. He still wasn't entirely sure what his former student felt for him, or what the addition of Suki had done to impact what had been a stable friendship from years past. One would have thought she'd outgrown her childhood crush on him long ago, but the events of the last few weeks had recently done much to shake that rock-solid opinion. To antagonize her just wouldn't be fair. For now. Having finished the brand, the blonde clambered off the saddle and pressed his hand to Appa's furry head. The sky bison rumbled questioningly, but not before trying to reach its head around and lick him. Here you go, buddy. He soothed. Just to be safe. Wait, Aang frowned, why Appa? We rely on him to fly us everywhere. Naruto pointed out, his glare scathing. You and I might be able to fly on our own power, but if something were to happen to the old boy, the rest of us would be up a creek without a paddle. Now, if someone ever tries to target him, I'll know of it. And if he were to be, gods forbid, captured, I'd be there to prevent it. Sound good? You've really thought of everything, haven't you? I try. Naruto yawned. Right, then. I'm going to take a nap. Suki, I want you to practice the meditation I showed you the other day, Kay? Do that a couple of times and I might be able to do something about your chakra problem. Yes, Sifu. Despite himself, the one-time Jinchuriki actually felt his ears burn a bit. Perhaps it was being called a teacher. Perhaps it had something to do with the fact that he'd never really taken on a student of his own before. In any case, he felt his cheeks warm with pride at being addressed as Sifu, for the first time since coming to this land. It was nice. But it was also tiring, to keep track of so many, to ensure that no harm came to his little. His tasks completed for the time being, Naruto leaned back in the saddle, consigning himself to a nap. It was peaceful up here amongst the clouds. One might think, you could simply drift off without so much as a care in the world. Content to do just that, he drifted off almost immediately, lulled into peaceful slumber by the gentle breeze and the promise of doing good. That was when the nightmares came. They always seized upon him when he least expected it, preying on these moments of weakness. He saw the world as a firebender would, bathed in beautiful flames, reduced to ash by his hand. As always, a girl stood at his right, and until this very moment he hadn't been able to recognize her. Now he saw, and now he knew, just as he knew her laughter, recognized those amber eyes and ebony hair. Azula. The scene blurred, leaving him dwelling in darkness. Murderer, a voice whispered out from the ether. Show yourself. he demanded, squaring his jaw and facing the dark. His mind knew what he would face, but his body was another story. His legs were powerless, helpless to move, as more than 1,000 hands sprouted from the earth, latching onto his ankles and dragging him down. Blue eyes scrunched shut, refusing to look into the faces of his captors, knowing full well what he would find there. The face of Hinata, of all those he had ever loved, all his friends, family, everyone he'd ever known. All those he'd left behind in the passage of time. Traitor, another voice hissed in his ear. He massacred many. He betrayed his own friends. He killed his own family. One such as him should not exist. He should be put to death. He should be killed by the ones he's slain. So ensorcelled was in his nightmare that he nearly didn't notice when Aang started jostling him awake hours later. He jerked upright with a small hiss, barely strangling the scream that threatened to come tearing out of his throat and into the open air. Cold sweat slicked his skin, his heart hammering out of his chest. Just a dream, he told himself. Just a dream, just a dream, just a dream. Are you all right? Suki was suddenly there, laying a hand across his shoulder. Naruto bit back a hiss as he remembered all those palms, clawing at him, tearing at his throat. I'm fine. Really, because you look like you were having a nightmare. I am fine. At her hurt expression, his own softened. Really, I am. It was just an old nightmare. A muscle jumped in Naruto's jaw, his temper threatening to overtake him in that instant. He bit back a growl, his blue eyes flicking towards the young avatar. Drop it, Aang. He sighed. I'll tell you later. Sorry, it's just, I've been thinking. Oof. Taking those words in stride, the former Jinchuriki reluctantly rose, shaking off the last vestiges of sleep. And what, pray tell, were you thinking about? The young avatar seemed to squirm beneath his gaze for what felt like an eternity before speaking. When he finally did, his words caused a pall to fall over the group. I think someone's trailing us. Sure enough, one could see smoke behind them on the horizon, a plume of black smoke rising in the distance. Katara let out a sigh as she sat up, stating, let's just hope that it's not the Fire Nation. That's the last thing we need. Indeed. A silence poured into the saddle, and Naruto leaned back into the seat as he processed what he could recall from his dream. He was growing used to these visions of his, but what he'd seen had disconcerted him. Were these kids going to lose the war without his intervention? Of course not. He had every faith in them. But those images still chilled his soul. What if his interference upset the delicate balance of this land? Already he was considered the Avatar by many, and doubtless his presence here would prevent many deaths, but still, what was this sense of unease he felt? And what did Azula have to do with it? Was that the fate of the world if he didn't redeem her? He pondered that matter for quite some time, the land growing steadily closer with each passing minute. Within a few minutes, they wouldn't have to worry about any attacks from sea, which meant their position would be that much more fortified against any enemy attack. Haru frowned just then, peering over the saddle. Hey, don't look now, but I think that might be. Even as the words were being transmitted to his ears, Naruto was pressed back into the saddle by a sharp turn of Appa. Suddenly a good few of those aches and pains decided to protest their very existence from the pressure being exerted on him even through his own mental blockage. As soon as the pressure let up, he exhaled in relief before he quickly released his chakra hold on the saddle and stood, earning a few anxious looks from his friends as he did so. The hell was that? He fumbled with the balance for a split second before sticking his feet to the saddle with chakra again, and he glanced over the edge just in time to see a massive bale of fire flash in their direction. Pressure pushed him back on his heels. Appa ascended, avoiding a direct hit, but shuddering from the glancing blow of the heat nonetheless. He was jerked around on his feet a moment from a couple of turns before the smoke of an extremely large blast of flame filled his vision in close proximity. Blue flame. It was there for only a moment before they flew past it, revealing the distinctive wedge shape of a Fire Nation Vasile, its black trim cutting in an angry swathe through the ocean below just in time for another shot to whistle perilously close. Azula. Aang finished with a gulp. Naruto groaned. Troublesome woman. Suki managed a nervous smile. Anyone want to bet she's still steamed about that stunt we pulled? Sokka snorted. Oh please, she probably doesn't even. Oh my god. If it wasn't for Naruto's hold on his shirt, he was pretty sure he would be laying on the floor, but he was also pretty sure that he would be in equal amounts of pain if compared to his current situation. The furious heat raging below their position suddenly intensified, that mere candle becoming a raging flame as another blue-white fireball sizzled past. Grey Ara. Appa bellowed in pain as a small comet seared just beneath his stomach, drawing an angry line across his hide. Naruto and Aang were up in the same instant, already moving amidst the bison's bellow. No glances were exchanged, nor were any words spoken. They already knew that their furry friend would do his best to ferry the rest of the gang to safety. It could not be said who leaped first, only that each avatar flung himself over the edge, that both hurtled towards the ship, one borne by his glider, the other by his chakra alone. You don't have to help me, you know. Naruto shouted over the wind as they hurtled toward the flagship. I can handle this myself. You're just one person. Aang replied, struggling to make himself heard over the rising gale. It'd be wrong of me to let you do all the work. Suit yourself. Naruto cracked a crazed grin. But if you're suggesting we make a game of this. What? No, I wasn't. Too late. Race ya. With a massive exertion of his chakra, the blonde rocketed forward, reaching the lone ship mere moments before Aang had the chance to follow from his glider. In that moment, that brief instant of hesitation, he alighted loudly upon the prow of the ship, the sudden deceleration creating an equally massive dent in the metal hull of the ship. He was left to take in everything in at a glance, the trebuchets, the soldiers, the firebenders, and there, standing at the head of them all, her eyes wide, her mouth open in a small, round O of disbelief. Azula. You. Every single soldier, bender or otherwise, scurried away at the sound of her voice. Azula might looked composed, with not so much as a single hair out of place, but were one to look deeper, they could easily see what had long since lurked beneath, the beginnings of madness, unearthed by this sudden shift in power. And in his experience, madmen, or madwomen in this case, were the most dangerous of all. They did not conform to any one strategy or doctor. Me. Naruto grinned, snuffing her flung fireball out between his fists. So what brings you to these waters, princess? I hear the cod are quite nice this time of year. You know damn well why I'm here, fool. Her words rose with each syllable, pitching ever higher. I've been banished. And it's all your fault. Because you showed me mercy that day. It wasn't long until she was all but shrieking at him, cursing his very existence from the darkest depths of her soul. Father banished me, but not because of that. Because of you he called me a traitor, accused me of liberating Earth Kingdom peasants to spite him. I'm no better than Zuzu now. No. I'm worse. Even if I were to capture you, even were I to kill you, he'd never allow me to come home. Never. Oh, right. Naruto mused. She probably doesn't understand that I impersonated her that day. Well, that's rough. He shrugged, settling for a half-truth. I wasn't aiming to get you banished when I revived you. Why did you do that? The sheer force of her exclamation rocked him back on his heels. Ah, I thought you'd be a bit more grateful, considering. Maybe I was, once. Azula hissed out, flinging a bolt of lightning, only to have it redirected in her face, nearly ending her for a second time. But not anymore. No one believes me. They all think I'm crazy. They say I'm losing my mind. But they don't know what I know in my head, Avatar. Yes, I know. She thrust a finely manicured finger at him. You killed me. And then you brought me back. Do you have any idea of my shame? My humiliation. Bad enough to know that you'd ended my life once, but you had to bring me back for a second time? I don't understand. Was my death not good enough for you? Do you intend to make me suffer for challenging you? To humiliate me even further? Those honeygold orbs held him. In that instant she was not a crazy fireball-slinging princess, she was simply a girl demanding answers, an explanation of why she had been wronged. Naruto exhaled a long-suffering sigh, pushing a hand through his matted locks. Typical. My one act of kindness, and it backfires. Pardon the cliché, he replied, but I brought you back because I saw the good in you, unlike most other firebenders. You can change. You can become something more than what you are. Your dim-witted brother has that potential too, but I doubt he'll realize it anytime soon. Azula snarled, suddenly hesitant in the face of his empathy. I am not good. You're just saying that so you can stab me in the back, like father and all the rest. Trust is overrated. Fear is the only way to ensure loyalty, and I know it. I beg to differ. Naruto argued, readying himself for another fireball. Trust is mutual. You have to give to receive. Just as I chose to give you life again. I'd call that trust, wouldn't you? He'd been right to ready his elf for another assault. This swath of flame was nimbly avoided by jumping over the exile's head. And what would you know of betrayal? The former princess snarled and darted after him, trying and failing to close the gasp. To be stabbed in the back by your own nation, having done all that they asked, day and night, without fail, only to be cast aside when you make one mistake? Do you? Naruto broke away from her with a frown. As a matter of fact, I know all too well the sting of betrayal. Incredibly, he found himself replying, blue eyes narrowing to crimson slits. I was betrayed by a man whom I'd thought to be my friend. He was a proud, foolish sod who left our village in search of power. I tried to bring him back and failed. Instead, I was forced to watch him change over the years, come to believe himself then his clan, to be better than everyone and anyone else. I tried to make him see reason over the years, tried to remind him that he still had friends. But he wanted me gone, me, my family, and all that I stood for. In the end, I had to kill him. But don't you see? He spread his arms wide in invitation. It's the reverse for you. Now that you've been banished, you don't have to deal with the royal flaming asshole anymore. Whoosh! He nimbly dodged aside as another blue-black fireball whistled past his head, but he did not stop speaking. Surely you must have friends outside the Fire Nation. You have the freedom to go see them now. In fact, I dare to say you have. Why you shut up? Azula cried, covering her ears with both hands. I don't want to hear this. Not from you. More freedom than anyone else in the world. Shut up. The burst of flame that followed her words was nothing short of spectacular. Her fireball spanned the entire width of the ship itself. There was no way he could dodge that without jumping overboard, and if he did that, he'd be exposed to the follow-up attack. There was really only one option. Naruto simply inhaled, and her flames withered and died, reduced to mere embers on the deck. Azula's voice was little more than a whisper. But that's not fair at all. Ah, I see you've been practicing. He nudged the dark soot appraisingly with a foot. Your flames are almost black now. They'll never be quite up to snuff with my Amaterasu, but still, you continue to impress. Tell me, if I were to say that you can fight me anytime, would you calm down? Assuming what? Azula regarded him warily, half expecting an attack. And by the gods themselves, she got one. Assuming you can swim. Naruto grinned and struck down upon the deck. Once. Twice. Thrice. Each strike split steel and twine before his knuckles, reverberating through the vessel's hull with such force that he actually flipped the ship into the air and broke it in half, sending the separate halves careening away from one another, end over end, plunging the princess and her soldiers into the drink. The avatar of the god snapped off a sarcastic salute and launched himself backwards, ripping into the air, patted his hands, smiling smugly down at the ship. Well, guess I'd better check up on Katara and the others. Had he tarried a moment longer, he might have seen the smaller lifeboat jettisoned forth from its remains. Had he stayed, perhaps risked a glance backwards, he might have spared himself much pain and suffering. But the avatar of the gods did not, and because he did not, things changed. And thus, he left, Azula trailing in his wake. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, why the pep talk? Why spare her life twice? At the time, I'd already wrested so much away from her. At the time, I simply couldn't bear the thought of taking her life again as well. I'll have to talk to Aang about that. Kid's far too soft-hearted for his own good. If he has any say in it, he probably won't even kill the Fire Lord. Somebody needs to toughen the boy up. Might as well be me. But I'm getting off track. Why spare Azula? Why let her live, and risk her causing chaos again and again, time after time? Looking back, the answer's pretty obvious to me. Guess I just have a thing for tragic souls. But when it happened, well, that changed a few things. Well, looks like I missed a few things. Naruto felt ash fill his throat as he descended to the ground as he beheld the destruction sprawled out before them. A bitter taste had swelled up upon his tongue, and not just because from the soot at their feet. It was the knowledge that the Fire Nation would commit such horrendous acts simply because they could. Some of them might be redeemable. Some, but not all. No mere forest fire could have done this. Fire Nation? He asked Sokka, expression grim. Fire Nation. What? No jokes. Naruto's deadpan was barely concealed. I'm counting on you for some comedy here. Sorry man, I got nothing after seeing this. You were burned again, Suki sighed, indicating the sorry state of his cloak. I'm more concerned about Appa. It's just a graze. Katara confirmed. He'll be fine in a day or two. Well, that's good too. He broke off as he saw Aang come towards him. Why did you do that? Do what, Arrowhead? He sighed as the avatar stalked closer, his expression one of righteous anger. You killed all those people on the boat when you tore it in half. Aang, Katara began, but Naruto cut her off with a hand. My dear boy, I did not kill them. He chastised, tone colder than ice itself. The ocean did that. If they can swim, they'll be fine. If they can't, then it's their own fault for attacking us. Perhaps if you grew a pair you'd learn to accept death as a natural part of life. You wouldn't be so squeamish about these things. Before the young monk could hope to continue, the blonde turned his attention elsewhere. Now, Earth Boy. Come here. We have a lot of work to do if we want to restore this forest. Yes sir. He bade Haru come close and together. The two of them tilled the earth, Haru with his earthbending and Naruto with his own application of raw power in ninjutsu. Within a matter of mere moments, the ashen soil had been properly tilled, better than before. But he didn't stop there. When their work was done he shooed the young bender away and set to work himself, as only a shinobi could. What are you going to do? Katara gulped, suddenly filled with trepidation. Naruto? This. Grunting, the blonde performed a single set of seals and clenched his hands together. You'd be amazed by the bloodlines you gain after absorbing an all-powerful monster. Without another word he spread into a horse stance, clasped his palms, and uttered a single phrase. Mokuton, Jukai Koten. Would style deep forest emergence? With those words, he breathed life back into the forest. Literally. Roots arose from the sundered soil, spreading upward to form trunks, then branches, then entire trees themselves, their tendrils digging deep into the loamy soil. As the gang looked on, they watched the ruinated soil burning from black to a healthy shade of brown, then a deep, verdant green. Before long the towering oaks began to blot out the sun itself, and yet the light still shone. Within minutes the forest was whole, or, barring that, a great deal better off than it had once been. It was a pleasant feeling, restoring what had been destroyed. Golden daggers of sunlight crept in through the branches and slashed at their eyes, unpleasantly forcing them to squint as the forest rose around them in a susurrus of crackling branches and growing roots. Their hands before their faces, as if they still had any reason to protect them from anything anymore, Team Avatar opened their eyes, to momentarily blind themselves before Naruto's radiance. He stood there in a cradle of light, grinning from ear to ear. And then, just as suddenly as his cloak had emerged, it vanished. The trees creaked to a half around him, their leafy limbs still stretching out towards the setting sun in unspoken prayer. Sokka took a look around and whistled. I can't believe you just did that. Yeah, it's a bit tiring. Naruto yawned. Creating a forest out of a single acorn. I can't believe it either. Scarce curtain of flame descended the shadows to light the newly made forest aflame. Branches went up. The gang turned to face this intruder and found themselves face to face with none other than a sopping wet Azula. She'd since lost her braid in the crash, and was dripping from head to toe. And yet somehow, in spite of all this, she still managed to look absolutely terrifying. At least to the others. Oh, was that important? She grinned eerily. I think that was important. Aang. Bison. Naruto ground out, ending forward. Village. Now. But. Now. Sokka ushered everyone onto Appa, a loud yip-yip. Sent the bison soaring into the sky and toward the nearby village they'd seen from the sky earlier. Naruto didn't dare turn his back on Azula now. Any chance of him prevailing and putting out this fire depended solely on his reaction time. Sending your friends away? She chuckled softly. Such a shame. Your fangirls won't be able to collect your corpse. Naruto shook his head in disbelief. Crazy didn't even begin to define this girl. Look, when I said we can fight anytime, I didn't think you'd be so. A fireball silenced him, obliterating a newly born tree before he could finish. So, what now? Now. Azula growled, her teeth bared. Now it's over. You're tired from recreating that forest, and you have no place to go. You can run, but I'll catch you. I may not be able to reclaim my honor by killing you, but it'll at least make me feel that much better. Naruto nearly face-bombed. Did you listen to anything I said? You're banished. Just like Zuko. Except capturing me won't restore your... A searing line of flame across his cheek cut him off. Don't even think about running. Azula circled him, a predator ready to pounce. Who said anything about running? Naruto sighed, reaching back to remove his cloak, casting the garment aside with an errant flick of his wrist. In case you've forgotten, I've beaten you once already. Twice, if you'd like to count this afternoon. Behind Azula's pale skin, the slow flushing of her face looked almost like a growing forest fire, and she seemed literally unable to catch her breath. Oh, yes. She remembered. She burned at the memory of how soundly she'd been beaten. Unthinking in her exasperation, she lashed out, flinging a fireball at him in anger. It was a mistake. Naruto simply raised a hand, Rinnegan flaring, and absorbed it. Just like that. Her blue-black flames rippled harmlessly against his unseen shield, her own power siphoned away, leaving him even stronger than before. That wasn't very nice. You mean I'm not good enough for you? You're hurting my feelings. Too bad. Naruto growled. I don't want to hear lies from you. I want the truth. Are you enjoying this? Are you sure? Her smile had just a touch of madness to it. I'm a pretty good liar. It's a crying shame your fighting skills aren't as good. He retorted. That did it. I'll show you skill. Naruto moved like water, form and volume, but shifting, changing, never in one place for more than the span of 2 beats. never allowing her to touch him or so much as even graze him in her endless assault. His quick and clever movements infuriated Azula to no end. Had he been toying with her before? He stepped forward. So too, did something else. The spirit registered as a black and white blur between the two of them, roaring and lashing out in the time it took for both warriors to blink. Its claws sank not into their flesh, but into their spirits, violently tearing them free and casting them into each other. Even Naruto, with his super-sensitive senses, only registered this much. He had the sense of being flung into something, but everything was so out of focus that he could barely try to breath, let alone think, as the universe blurred around him. Suddenly, the universe began to unblur. Naruto blinked in surprise, his world reeling, his skin numb. One moment he had been fighting Azula, and the next, this? He found himself staring at himself, utterly unable to believe what had happened. Or how it had happened. What the devil was going on here? Was he staring at a clone? But, no, he hadn't created one. What was going on here? He became aware of his own shuffling footsteps, his shallow breathing, blood rushing in his ears, sweat beating upon his brow. Then he looked down, and what he saw there turned his spine to ice. Why were his hands so small? And why was he wearing armor? More importantly, why did his chest feel so damn heavy? He took a tottering step forward, suddenly aware of hair before his visage, those ebony tresses blotting out his vision for the smallest of seconds. Naruto froze. Touched a hand to his face. Then his chest. Oh no. Suddenly, a voice yelled out sweet agony in holy flames, causing him to crane his neck in that direction. The forest was still burning around him, so it was difficult to properly believe what he was seeing, or if it was just the soot in his lungs. Why are you standing there? His body sputtered in a feminine tone, shattering all doubt. Stop messing with my body like that. Water you owe. Crap. It was Azula's voice that emerged from his mouth, albeit with a slight drawl. What he had thought was a clone was his own frightened body, staring back at him with horror and trepidation. But that wasn't him standing there. And if wasn't standing there, had he just swapped bodies with Azula? Chapter 7, Swap. Yeah, not my finest moment. As it turned out, some crazy forest spirit, I believe Aang later told me his name was Heibai, was responsible for the two of us swapping bodies. In all likelihood, it happened because Azula tried to burn down the forest I restored. As to why I was attacked? That remains a mystery, even to me. Regardless of the who, what, when, where or why, that evening almost proved lethal for the both of us. The fire Azula had started nearly enough in its own right, but with the two of us in unfamiliar bodies, well, for most, that would have been a death sentence right then and there. It was horrible. Not only was I forced to watch as everything I'd grown burned down around me, but I had to share the experience with an irate ex-princess. Thankfully, Heibai had turned its attention to the village. This battle would be Aang's, not mine. I had problems of my own. She couldn't use any of my abilities, but I found myself beginning to get a handle on hers within an hour of exchanging bodies. Hey, when you spend a lifetime observing the finest benders in the Fire Nation, long before Suzan's little stunt, mind you pick up a thing or two. There was one more perk to being trapped in her body, however. Stop that this instant. Naruto and Azula's body paused in what he was doing, shirt poised just over his midsection, exposing the pale flesh of her stomach for all the moonlight to see. This hesitation was only momentary, however, and with a flick of the wrist sent the soaked garment flying to join the rest in the pile. All the armor and trappings she had worn had been cast aside onto the riverbank, her boots and gloves removed, leaving the shinobi-turned-firebender clad only in a pair of battered breeches and mere moments before, the tattered remains of a shirt torn by brambles and briars. I'm sorry, was that important? He grinned, golden eyes flashing in the night as he hooked his thumbs in the broken waistband of her pants. In that case, you won't mind if I stop. It's your fault we're both sopping wet to begin with. Naruto pointed out at last, slinging her technically now his wet clothes over a nearby branch. We had to dive into the lake to get away from the flames, remember that? Just be thankful it didn't spread any further. He risked a pointed glance to the charred remnants of the forest, a forest he'd only just restored. Which reminds me. No. Azula grabbed for him, but she was still unaccustomed to this new, tall, bulky body. She overreached in her attempt to stop Naruto's treacherous stripping, and in doing so, found the pants flung in her face. Her balance sufficiently sundered, the former princess was sent tumbling backward to land face first in the drink. Naruto's lilting laughter, the laughter of her body, the scoundrel, echoed after her, mocking the once proud bender for her tiny and feeble attempt to stop him. Azula growled, ripped the leathers off her face, and pushed her body back into off the shallows, propping herself up on her hands and knees. I swear, when I catch you. Not much to catch here, darling. Azula froze as she caught sight of Naruto again. And promptly started spluttering. What? Now he stood before her clad only in her undergarments, adding insult to injury, he'd even struck a pose. Were it not for that black lace bra and underwear, well, Azula didn't want to complete that thought. And then, just when she was certain matters could not prove any worse, that the fates themselves could no mock her any more than they already had. They did. Wow, these girls are a lot bigger than I'd thought they'd be, Azula. Naruto mused, fondling them between those her delicate hands. Nice body, too. And you're only what, 17? Gotta admit, whoa. His head dipped backwards abruptly. A heartbeat later Azula crashed into the ground, her arms closing around nothingness as the shinobi cartwheeled away with an almost effortless ease. In that instant, he almost reminded her of Tai Li, the way he spun gracefully, deceptively delicate, then darted back towards her with sudden, straightforward power. You've been keeping in shape, I see. He trilled pleasantly, mocking with her own voice. I had to admit, I was a little worried about swapping bodies for a bit there. But I think this is a nice trade, don't you? I may not have any chakra to work with, but I'm nimble as ever. And you, ha ha ha. Nice try. This time, she managed to get a handful of his hair before he escaped her large, rough hands, snatching a few stray strands before he lashed up and out with his heel and struck upward. At first, Azula didn't understand what he was doing. Yes, the blow would certainly sting a little, but why was he aiming so high? Pain. That was Azula's only thought as she crumpled to the ground. Star's whole planets detonated before her vision, leaving her blinded to all else except the pain between her legs. Naruto chuckled mirthlessly, and, before the pompous princess had a much-needed chance to recover, he threw her back into the water. Face first. The once proud royal gasped as water flooded her nostrils, hurt his body floundering helplessly in the drink for a heart-stopping instant of pure terror before finally she managed to get the arms back under her control. One thought dominated her mind. Vengeance. Swift and certain. When I get out of this, I am going to kill him. Strong hands pushed up against the riverbed, levering her head up just enough to voice her complaint followed by a mouthful of water. Anger painted her every feature, her mouth was contorted in a rictus of white-hot fury so intense that the water itself seemed to steam off her face. That was as much as her powers seemed to amounted to in this body. Steam. Naruto was waiting for her there on the bank when she finally clambered back to the bank, legs crossed and arms folded, looking every inch the lady in her body. Hell, he'd even managed to redress himself while she'd been busy trying not to drown, having taken her hair out of the bun content to run her finger through the dark tresses. Did you enjoy your bath? He asked mildly with her voice. Oh, you have such soft hair. This was added with grin, I'll have to consider growing mine out sometime. Azula growled. Bath? She hissed, low and fierce. Yes, I believe that's what I said. Naruto's golden eyes glittered back at her. Then how about I give you one? Enraged, both by her impromptu soak and what the avatar was putting her through, Azula tried to fling a fireball at him. All that emerged was a harmless puff of feeble smoke. Not even the tiniest ember would obey her. Naruto looked at her for a long moment, full lips twitching in bemusment's grand gaze. Then he frowned, and his voice became like death, the same death she'd doled out to more than a few servants in her childhood for failing to please her. He rose from the long in one smooth movement, his now golden eyes regarding her coldly, coolly. More than one guard had been on the receiving end of that awful glare, and although it was still her face, Azula felt herself quail a bit when she looked into those hazel eyes. Then Naruto's newfound visage hardened and she realized what he was about to say, the same thing she herself had often said to those she considered to be beneath her. I believe someone needs a lesson in humility. He stepped forward and struck like a viper, sending her sprawling back into the water with a deceptively swift swing of his heel. That was all it took. Another swing swept her visage into the muck, eliciting an impromptu shriek of surprise from her new body. Azula choked out a desperate gasping breath, rose on those quavering hands and knees, only to find her head ruthlessly taken hold of and driven back under yet again, her nose pressed up the muck of the riverbed. Her body thrashed and floundered, but even in this form, even in her body, Naruto was simply too strong for her. The more she struggled the more it hurt, her body refusing to respond with the awesome strength he had displayed this body had displayed during their previous clashes. It was frightening. What's going on here? Growing ever more frantic, losing oxygen with each passing second, Azula tried to call upon her bending, only to remember once more that this body lacked any sort of chi. Without it, she was as helpless as a newborn and twice as fragile. Powerless. Her strength meant nothing to her in this body. Somehow, that thought terrified her even more. Weakness was her greatest fear. Without her bending, without her agility, without any of was she nothing. Her mind worked frantically, scrabbling for a solution, anything at all, but, in her panic, she couldn't get her arms around to grapple with him, and with his knees pinning her legs. Abruptly, Naruto stood up and pulled at the last minute, freeing her from a watery grave. Azula gasped and inhaled, sweet, glorious air flooding her lungs as Naruto held her head out of the water. His visage came back into focus as she blinked the pain away from her eyes, her own face staring down at her with chilling dispassion. Are you quite done? His tone was light, but she could hear the steel beneath, utterly uncaring that he'd nearly drowned her in his own body. I'll do this as many times as I have. Oof. His words ended in a startled grunt as Azula bucked, using her larger body to rear back and kick him in the face. Hard. To her surprise, Naruto made no move to dodge, even when the back of her boot slammed into his chin with all its might. There was a silence, the princess unable to believe she'd actually struck him, the shinobi startled to find he'd actually felt it. A trickle of blood trickled down from his mouth, trailing across a cheek and down his chin. Suddenly and without warning, Naruto's grin folded in on itself, his expression thunderous, golden eyes full of murder. He turned, spat out a tooth, clicked his jaw, and to her horror, smiled. It was not a pleasant thing, that smile, not by any means. Oh, he hissed, the words veritably dripping with venom, a little fight in ya, eh? I like that. And I'm going to love this. In the time it took for those words to pass between them, for Azula to shudder in fear, Naruto did not attack. Instead, he simply moved. First, much to her infinite dismay, the blonde-turned blackette reared back and spat, launching a scarlet gob of spittle and blood back in Azula's face, blinding her, preventing her from attacking again. In that split second of hesitation as she flailed, he struck again, his forehead slamming hers like a barreling platypus bear, sending several stars of agony detonating before her sight one by one by one. Even as she struggled to recover, she felt those slim hands wrap round her throat and force her into the murky lake once more. And down we go. Azula barely had time to suck in a breath before he shoved her visage into the shallows again. She thrashed and flailed, knowing she was using up her air, but to no avail. Every fiber of her being, her very soul, screamed that he wouldn't let her up for air this time, that he'd honest to agony kill her inside his body and consequences be damned. And, she fought, lamenting her inability to prevent her own demise, cursing herself for seeking out this cruel creature, cursing fate for taking her body away and leaving her powerless, but above all, cursing the man known as Uzumaki Naruto. When he let her up for air again, she wanted to weep at her own powerlessness. When she tried to gouge his eyes out, he simply put her under again. He did this time after time, bringing her up, waiting for her to lunge and summarily to allow her a shallow gasp of air, only to push her under for her impudence each time. With each reprimand her strikes grew weaker and weaker, until at last she recognized the futility of her efforts, for the moment. To struggle any further was to risk her own life by drowning. At long last Naruto let her up for air. This time, Azula did not resist. "Are you done?" he asked again. "Yes," she replied meekly. "Good." He grunted and tossed back onto the bank. She didn't even have the strength to make a sound as her body struck the dirt. "Not yet. This is humiliating," Azula said with bleakness in her voice. "First I get banished, then my ship sinks, then I swap bodies with the buffoon, and now this." "Speak for yourself," he shot back. "This body has speed and strength, but no endurance whatsoever." He flexed a wrist for emphasis. "See? Pretty sure I fractured this damn thing hitting you. Not to mention losing a tooth back there. And on top of that, my face is swelling from that kick of yours. Shit, if it weren't for these assets, I'd..." Somehow, Azula almost produced a fireball at that remark. "Careful now," Naruto chortled as he danced away. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself." Azula snarled, a glimmer of her old self rising to the fore, summoned by his words. "You say that, and yet you're the one hurting in the end." If she'd expected to rile him, she would be sorely disappointed. Naruto gave a very unladylike snort and pranced past her, utterly uncaring for the threat his own body posed. "Police." The black cat snorted. "I know for a fact that my body is far more durable than that. You simply lack the will to control it, is all. Give it a day or two, it'll heal right up, you know? Stop speaking that slang with my mouth." Before she could aim for Naruto, the nimble fighter was already onto her. A first uppercut made her lose her footing, her fist frantically hit nothing but void and the air around her. An elbow then came smashing directly against her face, further destabilizing her as she backed several steps away under the impact. Angered, she wiped away a trickle of blood that was flowing from the corner of her lips as she stared down at Naruto, holding his guard up, but with an ironic grin that screamed invitation for more. And more she would give him. Rushing him with a shriek, Azula drew upon all her skill, all she knew of combat. Bending or not, he was just as disadvantaged as she was. If she could just get close. Naruto surprised her then. He stood his ground, features clenched tight in concentration, and thrust a fist outward. Azula didn't slow. There was no way he could bend in her body, just no way. The hairs on the back of her neck stood at sudden attention as the temperature spiked. No. She rolled aside just in time, a split second before a stream of blue fire enveloped where she'd been standing. She gazed at Naruto, baffled. At first, he seemed just as surprised as she, but then that shock settled into steely resolve. "Finally," he hissed. "I've figured out how your body works." "What?" Azula never finished that sentence as Naruto struck again, punching the air even as she clambered to her feet. This time there was no thin flickering stream of fire. It was so much more. "That shouldn't be," she faltered, her charge stalling as a massive blast of blue fire erupted into existence, the fireball bearing down on her with ruthless intent. "Too fast. I won't make it in time." Azula threw herself aside, but too little late, she screamed as she rolled aside, the fires glancing her arm before she could to escape. And then it was past, the scorching heat roaring onward, detonating harmlessly in the lake. But you, how?" Azula spluttered, clutching at her arm. Naruto snickered wordlessly, grinning as he twirled a tongue of blue fire in his palm. "How are you firebending? I've had an entire lifetime to study you firebenders. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out once I gained access to chi?" His grin inexplicably grew. Now, how did Iroh create lightning? Something about separating the chi and allowing to flow through you, hey? He laughed, replicating the movements. My fingers are sparking. I think I've almost got it. Will you stop it? You're going to fry us. BZZZZT. A deafening crackle ended her complaint, as a stream of black lightning erupted from Naruto's fingertips and scorched a crater between them. Naruto whistled as he beheld his handiwork. Not bad for my first try. Azula was baffled. How could she be so clumsy in this body while he remained so nimble? Her every skill felt impeded. She couldn't even summon up the rage nor the agility needed to capture him. It was infuriating. As if something were actively blocking her. Impeding her every movement. Almost as if. Right you are, Naruto replied sagely, as though he'd somehow read her very mind. I've had someone try to take my body once before, it wasn't entirely pleasant. Yes siree, when you're as paranoid as I am, you learn to place a few limiters on yourself. They were set to trigger in case my spirit ever left my body against its will. All you've access to now is an awkward, uncoordinated shell. Hell, you probably can't even use my chakra. I, on the other hand, find no such block in this body of yours. I'm curious to learn what it's capable of, but I'm kind of focused on this nice body right now. Not to mention the tattoo I gave you earlier. Azula paled. Tattoo. That's a secret. Naruto cupped her breast for emphasis. Stop touching them or by Agni, I will burn you to ashes. There was a silence. His lips curled into a smile as he watched her seethe. Wouldn't you just be burning your own body? Arg. 5 minutes of failed attempts later on her part, and they were right back where they started. She lay flopped on the bank, only this her right arm, his arm, was screaming in pain, badly burned at the shoulder. Naruto didn't even bother to help her, though it was technically his body that had been scorched. What are you waiting for? Azula cried out, clutching her wound. Help me. You brought this upon yourself. His visage remained stern. I may play the prankster, but that doesn't mean I can't be serious. He rose from his crouch and started toward her at a gait. I've fought worse villains the like of which you'll never know. Some I converted, forced them to see the error of their ways. Others, well, I'm sure you can guess. He stood over her now, contemplating her in his body. It would be so easy to finish what I started with you now, don't you think? With this body of yours, I could wreak all kinds of havoc. He reached down, cupping her whiskered chin in hand. So, the question remains, what the devil should I do with you now? Decisions. So? What'll it be? Bite me. Oh, no, he feigned horror. Is that your best? Ha! Although, you should be careful. Ha! Azula gulped as he moved to straddle her, a look then that sent small shivers shooting down her spine and not necessarily bad ones. I'm not above screwing myself, Azula. That center face, or was it Naruto's? Gah, burning brighter than Susan's comet. How could he be so brazen like that? Did you think I was serious? He snickered, pulling away. But fun and games aside, this is a good chance for the two of us to talk. Why on earth would I speak to you, Avatar? A blast of fire scorched the earth mere millimeters from her head. That's why. Naruto lowered his hand, smiling serenely. Azula weighed her options. With this body in such a sorry state, she really had no way of counteracting her own bending in a way. If she resisted, she was done for. If she stayed her tongue, however, she might be able to discover more information on the Avatar, and thereby a way to take him down. It galled her to yield like this, but she truly had no choice. Fine. Good girl. Naruto patted his forehead with a benign palm, but there was a distant, misty glint in those eyes as his fingers grazed over her forehead. I'll be frank with you, princess. It was never my intention to have you banished as you were. Believe what you will, but trust me when I say I know what you're going through. He chuckled bitterly. It's ironic, isn't it? We both know what it's like to lose everything, and be left with nothing. That expression, on her face, was suddenly dour. Almost somber, even. I've had to watch as my friend's family, even the land I once dwelled upon, were taken from me, devoured by the progress of time and mankind. Likewise, you've had everything taken from you, not by time, but by your royal prick of a father. You don't know anything about me. Azula hissed. And my father is a great man. A great flaming asshole is what he is. Naruto snapped back. I bet he's never once told you he loves you. Her pained expression, however slight, must be given it away, for he smirked. Didn't think so. And, as to your earlier statement, I know more than you think, girl. You're an open book to me. For starters, you have an inferiority complex because of Ozai. You fear rejection, so you see to control others with fear and intimidation as your sword and shield, never allowing any close enough to care. His fingers brushed her forehead again, and this time Azula could feel him probing within her mind. Was he regaining his strength? Did his power derive from the body, instead of the spirit? If that was the case, she was in dire straits indeed. She bristled as his mind brushed her once again, helpless to do anything but quiver. Socially awkward, too. It seems Mai and Ty Lee are the closest thing to actual friends. Wonder how they feel about you being banished? Azula froze at the mention of her friends in question, a cold hand of fear gripping her heart. The things Naruto might do to them. Stop it. But the Avatar did not stop. Not to mention the whole thing with your mother thinking you're a monster. Stop it. And you're jealous of Zuko because she paid more attention to him? Wow. But in any case, that's why. I told you to stop. Azula begged with tears in her eyes. She didn't think she could take any more of this. I'd like you to join us. Naruto finished. Subsequently, the silence was deafening. Join you? Did I stutter? Golden eyes flashed in warning, and once more Azula found herself cowed. Even in her own body, the blonde knew how to put her in place. Not just as a firebender, but as a person, I think you would be a fine addition to the team. Besides, for all our disagreements, we're more alike than you'd care to admit. You're not pure evil. Just misunderstood. It might be the old me speaking here, but I still think there may be hope for you yet. He blanched at her unreadable expression. A slim hope, but still. Azula actually flushed. Why? Why are you being so kind to me? Naruto chuckled, coming from Azula's mouth, it sounded oddly girlish. I told you, there's potential in ya. You could do great things for this world with your power and influence. Wonderful things. At that, his visage took on a contemplative expression. Let's say, for example, once I'd beaten and butchered your father, you became the next Fire Lord. Say you actually ruled with a steady hand? Of course, you'd have to overcome your complex first. The fire, she began. Also your fault dash. I know. Azula snapped back. I'm sorry. Forget I said anything. Just shut up. Once you've considered my offer, I will. For a moment, Azula actually considered it. She recalled Uzumaki Naruto defeating her so effortless back on Kyoshi, ending her life only to revive her again. Maybe you'll come back as a different person. The Avatar had spoken softly to her then, those words a gentle trickle of compassion so different from the rapidity of hatred and fear she had encountered all her life. Just now, he'd spoken to her the same way. She hung her head at these words, trying to decipher the feelings churning through her chest. I've really lost, haven't I? She could feel the immediate and familiar rise of contempt for her opponent at the mere concept of this avatar pitying her. Azula could also sense the rusty emotion of respect for Naruto, for this fighter who was fueled by love rather than rage. And, almost completely eclipsed by these two other emotions, Azula could feel the longing for a companion, for someone to talk to, for someone to help her off the ground when she's down. Where's the happiness in that? Perhaps for someone to love her, even when she fails. Like hell. The sudden realization that she was even considering herself weak brought a wave of rage to her mind with the ferocity of a great and dark tempest. Despite her opponent's mercy towards him, Naruto looking down in her eyes, pleading for him to stop, the anger won over Azula and she yanked her arm out of the avatar's gentle grip. "Don't you fuck with me, you bastard!" She roared, swarming up against him with her good arm, her fingers finding his throat. "You took everything from me. I'll never work with you. I'd sooner see you dead." Dead. Is that so? For a genuine moment, the avatar actually seemed sad. Well then, if you insist on being uncooperative, I suppose I'll have to eliminate you for good this time. It took everything she had not to scream as he ignited his foremost finger and pushed it to her forehead, the heat of that lone fingertip sizzling into her flesh. Odd. Why were his fingers glow? Naruto cringed as the world between him and Azula blurred once more, boundaries his vision doing a 180. Instead of standing he found himself on the ground, eyes rolling back in his head, wincing as pain flooded his body and soul. His mind brushed against Azula's for a terrifying instant. All her anger, fear and hatred were communicated to him in that instant. And then, as swiftly and inexplicably as it had begun, their brief union was done. Naruto found himself peering up at Azula, and she down at him, each torn between confusion and exultation. Somehow, someway, they were back in their bodies again. He himself nearly laughed, all the while fighting the urge to scream as his wounds made themselves evident. His body remained covered in small burns, but it was his shoulder that ached the worst, the charred flesh protesting to even the slightest rise and fall of his chest. Ah, crap. He silently swore as he rolled his aching joint in its socket. It wouldn't heal until tomorrow at the earliest, but now, it was only a liability to him. He could feel it healing, but much too slowly. Well. Naruto coughed up at her. Looks like the tables have turned. Indeed, they have. Azula's smile ranked right up there with his top three fears, superseded only by the terror of all things ghostly and a world without ramen. Such a shame. A few more minutes and you might have had me there. Despite himself, Naruto feigned a smile at those words. In his present state, she might actually be able to capture him or worse, end him right here and now. But his hand was still on her throat, something a veteran like Azula should have noticed. And yet she hadn't. It would be so easy just to snap her neck and be done with it. As such, it came as a complete surprise when she jerked her head around and bit him. Bit him. Naruto blinked in surprise, recoiled from the unexpected move. Don't worry, Azula purred, I'm not going to kill you. First, I'm going to make you suffer. Starting with those hussies you hold so dear. Naruto snorted. Those hussies could kick your ass 7 ways to Sunday. His gaze suddenly hardened. And, on the off chance you did harm them, I'd kill you. I don't take kindly to those who threaten my precious people, you too well. I won't hurt you unless you make it necessary. She tilted her head to the side in question. Will it be necessary? Probably. Before she could level a retort of her own, the blonde levered himself upward on his good arm and spun with his feet, striking not at Azula but at everything around her. The blast was nothing short of spectacular, currents of wind chakra erupting from his legs, windmilling, forcing Azula to take a step backwards as a current of wind chakra propelling him bodily backwards towards the lake. Even as he flew he righted himself, pouring chakra into the soles of his boots, gaining traction where there was none to be found. There was distance between them now, and distance was all he needed. Thank Kami he'd mastered one-handed seals all those years ago. I never thought I'd be more grateful to Haku. Besides, I can't die here. Something strange happened then. His charred shoulder, the one he was certain he'd never regain full functionality with, began to heal. It rapidly mended before his eyes, burned flesh stitched itself back together in an instant, all the burns his body had accumulated disappearing in the blink of an eye. Both Blonde and Black had blinked, baffled by this turnaround. Ha! Naruto flexed his newly healed limb. Looks like my regeneration isn't ready to quit on me just yet, after all. Which means... Azula blanched. Can't we talk about this? No. Naruto's golden aura leapt back to life, his cloak larger and more intense than ever. The rapidly darkening skies lit up with the unearthly light, this golden radiance trembling at the return of the avatar. An avatar of the gods. The next thing Azula knew, she was flying back, her face now adorned by something best described as a dent in her cheeks. The next thing she knew, she was knocked upwards. A blinking gold light was growing larger at the end of his vision. The next, she was knocked back down. And the next thing Azula knew, for quite some time after that, was pain. Did you hear something? Hear what? Suki perked up, her attention drawn not by Katara's voice, by the sound of a thunderclap in the distance. Naruto had been gone for several hours now, and in that time, much had occurred. The village they had taken refuge in had been attacked by a spirit, Sokka and Haru had been kidnapped by said spirit, forcing Aang to go after them, only to vanish into the forest, never to return. The sky had grown horribly dark since then, and although morning was fast approaching, no sign of the sun could be seen. Spirits, where were they? Hear what? That. The waterbender turned her gaze toward the skies as thunder roared through the heavens. Suki flinched as a dull rumble rippled through the earth. Evidently Naruto's battle with Azula had resumed in earnest, or worse, for them to feel the effects of their battle even from here was truly a feat of wonder. Momo cringed, whimpering as lightning split the sky. Appa covered his head with a paw. Katara sympathized. The fear she felt was not just for herself, but for that of Naruto as well, if not more son. She knew he was capable of world-shattering feats, and yet if this continued... I hope he's alright. Azula reeled from yet another impossibly strong blow. She's lost count. Her opponent was an unstoppable force of nature, it seemed, and defeat was growing near. To think, he'd been holding back this entire time. But no longer, she realized, as another blow dropped her into the earth, only for a second to launch her into the skies moments later. A third sent her body caroming off the soil, once again mercifully putting her body out of range from the deadly and almost unseen strikes. Yes, she was back in her body, for all the good it had done her. Naruto was dominating her, proving his superiority once more. Kami, to think she almost missed having him in Herochrist. That came out so wrong. Why are you standing there? Naruto called down to her, striding down upon the air itself. Aren't you going to fight back? Azula scrambled away, putting some distance between herself and this impossible fighter. You. She stared at Naruto's defiant figure, almost unable to believe what she'd been put through because of this one simple avatar, this mere man. I will not stand for this. Too bad. Naruto's voice whispered in her ear when had he gotten behind her, causing the princess to start in surprise. You don't get a say, not anymore. Bakram. Her face kissed the soil that had bruised with enough force to make her bounce. Before she could recover, Naruto was there, trapping her in a prison of earth, binding her arms and legs before could even think to fling both at him and escape. Congratulations, you're my prisoner at the moment. Now, I'm going to present you with one of two choices. He said slowly. Join us, or die. For good this time. For emphasis he held up a hand, revealing a small yet rapidly growing raisin shuriken held in his palm. Azula bristled at the sight of that technique, trying to skitter backwards despite her bonds and failing miserably. It swelled with each passing second, rapidly expanding, the keening shriek of its sour note threatening to drown out everything else and end her life. Well? Naruto asked. What's it going to be? Several minutes later. Naruto. The mismatched blonde turned as he strode into the village, Azula slung over his shoulder like a ragdoll. Not quite the way he'd intended to introduce her to the group, but it'd have to do. Now he paused at the sound of Suki's voice. Mere seconds later the Kyoshi warrior slammed into him, nearly bowling the blonde over, causing him to drop his charge in favor of embracing his assailant. Slender arms wrapped round his chest and drew him to her, her face all but buried in his burned shirt. Any attempt to extricate himself proved pointless, she simply moved with him. Hey! Naruto grunted his surprise and managed to wriggle his way free and hold her at arm's length. I'm fine, Suki. Why were you crying? Had she been wearing her warrior makeup it would have been horribly smudged by now. As it were those hazel orbs remained red and puffy, the poor thing looked as though she'd been bawling her eyes out. You know I'm perfectly fine MMMPH. His mind exploded into white as her mouth struck his, her lips connecting with a suddenness he hadn't expected. It was his first kiss in over a century. His eyes shot open in surprise, her kiss was cool but gentle, her two lips caging his upper lip between them. Part of him wanted to balk, to ask why she was doing this, but he was completely overwhelmed by her as she released her wrist and cupped his cheek with her hand. He soon found himself returning the kiss, deepening it as she opened her mouth and slid her tongue out and against his. She reached upwards with her arms and wrapped them around his neck, a soft whimper fleeing their coupled mouths as he pulled her body closer to his. How long had it been since he'd felt this? A part of him knew it was foolish to have feelings for a teenager, especially when he himself had lived for hundreds of years, but he found it impossible to resist, his arms taking matters into their own hands, refusing to relinquish their hold upon the young maiden before him. What was it about her that attracted him so? There were no words, nothing to explain how he felt, how his heart all but soared in his chest from their lip lock. It was like having something live for again, no longer would he shuffle from place to place while wearing the mask of jester. Now he actually had something to fight for, something. For a moment it was just that, just the two of them. Just. Ahem. At the sound of Katara's voice, Suki jerked back as if she'd been burned. Sorry, she whispered, her lips leaving his, but refusing to release his arms. Don't be. Naruto replied, catching the slight shiver his words elicited in her. I thought you were. She's been like that ever since you left. Katara said, coming up beside him. Thankfully she made no move to embrace him, contenting herself to a slight smile at his return. Good to have you back. But there was a touch of steel in her eyes, a quiet anger he'd come to know all too well. He'd have some explaining to do, but for now, he offered a grin of his own, relieved to find his charges unharmed. Where have you been? Naruto explained what had happened at length, careful to omit the interesting parts as he informed his students of what had occurred. Seriously? Suki balked. You guys swapped? I thought that only happened in cartoons. Suki, this is a cartoon. What? No, it isn't. Actually. If the two of you are quite done breaking the fourth wall, Katara interrupted, her gaze straying to the prone princess, what is she doing here? She's going to teach Aang firebending. Naruto replied simply. Their combined deadpan was barely concealed, momentarily united by their shared confusion. What? Azula groaned at that, stirring from her slumber at last. She's awake. Naruto commented mildly. Good. This makes things easier. He trailed off as Azula bolted to her feet and shoved a finger in his face. Katara and Suki bristled, well aware she could easily blow his head off with lightning, but Naruto didn't so much as bat an eyelash. Did you want something? The blonde blinked. Azula growled. Listen, Avatar. I can join your group, or I can do something unspeakably horrible to you and your friends. Your choice. Coming from her mouth, those words sounded quite strange. Most strange indeed. She was likely trying to save face in front of Katara and Suki, but when faced with such a threat, he simply burst out laughing. What's so funny? Naruto managed to explain between bouts of delirious snickering. You really need to work on your people skills, Azula. A final chuckle and he straightened, his blue eyes adopting a semi-serious expression. And besides, you're asking the wrong person. The ex-princess offered a soft sound that only made her expression even more priceless. You mean, you're not the Avatar? An Avatar, yes. But the Avatar? Naruto grinned as he revealed the ruse. Nope. But thanks for joining us. The slow coloring of Azula's face was possibly the most priceless thing in the world. You damn cheeky dash. Speaking of cheeky, where's Aang? Naruto frowned. I haven't seen him. Or Sokka. Or Haru. Katara told him. A spirit? Seriously? Well, yes. This is why I don't leave you guys alone. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.